coming. As usual, we seem to be having a full house, and I'm going to kind of talk slowly in case anybody else drifts in a little bit. I want to tell you a little episode that I encountered just the other day when one of our residents came and talked to me about a situation they were having. Situation was that mom is approaching death. Could be hours, could be days. Her children are in a state of, you can almost fill in the blank, confusion, anger, sadness, panic, and conflict. Why the conflict? Because mom didn't tell anybody, especially in writing, what she wanted to have happen when she could no longer express her wishes. She told them, she said, oh, when I die, I want such and such and such and such. Problem is, when somebody tells you that, whether it was 8 years ago or 8 days ago, memory can be treacherous. And when there's more than one person listening, they often hear things differently. So, confusion, conflict, anger, all could have been avoided by something like this. And that's why we thought it was important to have someone talk to us about this. And I'm sure Jamie's going to go on and tell you far more about it than I will. Jamie Buller is Director of Advanced Care Planning for Community Hospice and Palliative Care. I've attended a number of her talks up at UNF when she gave in-service for volunteers, and I'm delighted to have her here now. I don't think I'll go through all your credentials. Suffice it to say that she knows what she's talking about. So, and if you would, I think she would like you to hold your questions until near the end or at the end so she can show you everything that's on there. You should have a bunch of handouts too to follow along with. So having said that,
Thank you.
You
Well, it's great to be here today. I am actually glad these screens are lowered because I'd be distracted and I also might not want to leave. So you do have a beautiful campus. So I really applaud staff and administration on keeping this so nice. So I am going to talk to you a little bit today about Honoring Choices Florida and advanced care planning. I'm going to spend the first few minutes just quickly going through the advanced directives that are in Florida law. And then I'm going to talk about advanced care planning and how it's different than advanced directives, and the Honoring Choices Florida being something that has been created locally within our community in collaboration with all of the hospitals. So, there we go. Whoops. Too far. Advanced care planning is definitely a gift to loved ones. As Dan mentioned, there's often conflict and angst at the end of someone's life because either the individual had never had a conversation with family members about what they'd want, and or they had not put their wishes in writing. And this conflict tends to happen in a hospital. And the doctors and hospital administrators and staff don't want to be in a position of choosing who is the proper decision maker. And I think in order for us to remain in control of what happens to us, we have an obligation to our loved ones to have had the conversation and put those wishes in writing. These are the actual documents in which you can document what you want. And these are all in Florida statute. I'm not going to go through the very bottom one, which is organ donation. That can be a presentation that can take a whole day. But the first one is a living will, and that's a document in which you identify what you want or don't want if you meet certain medical criteria. And I'll go through that medical criteria in a minute. The healthcare surrogate is the person that you decide and choose would make decisions for you and express your wishes. If you can't speak for yourself, you should always be in a position to make your own decisions if you can. But if you can't, you need someone to be your advocate. And that person is called a healthcare surrogate. And a healthcare surrogate is especially critical. It's not that that person always has to make life and death decisions. They may just have to give consent for a surgical procedure because maybe you're unconscious from a car accident. So that person is called upon to make decisions when you lack capacity, but you don't have to meet any other medical criteria for that person to be able to intervene on your behalf. The durable power of attorney form is, on one hand, it's similar to a healthcare surrogate because it almost always includes a clause that allows that person to make healthcare decisions for you, but it's far more extensive. It is the document that you have in place if you need someone to be able to manage finances, deal with property, access a safe deposit box, cash checks. The one difference between the durable power of attorney and healthcare surrogate is that once you sign a durable power of attorney, it's effective immediately, regardless of whether you have capacity. So with the healthcare surrogate, you have to lack capacity. With the durable power of attorney, once you appoint someone to be your DPOA, it's immediately effective. So obviously you want to make sure that the person you choose is someone you trust because they have a lot of authority with finances and financial affairs. The do not resuscitate order is that yellow piece of paper that is at the tables. This is different than a living will in that it actually serves as a doctor's order. And it's the only document in Florida that allows you to get a doctor's signature, you sign it or your surrogate signs it, and it's a portable order. So if you go into a hospital and you have this form, they should transfer that order into your medical record. And if you leave from there and let's say you go to rehab, that order goes with you, and then you may come back home and have some home health, that order stays with you. The intent of the DNRO is to let caregivers know that you don't want to be resuscitated. It's not for everybody. I, at this point in my life with no serious illness, would not have a DNRO because if I collapsed on the golf course, I want someone to do CPR, treat me, get me to a hospital, and treat me appropriately. If I had a chronic illness, let's say I had a terminal cancer, then I would reconsider and I would have the yellow DNRO. So it really is intended for someone whose life expectancy is less than a year. And that's when you should start thinking about the DNRO. A pre-need guardian is actually a little known advance directive, and it really is a document that serves to eliminate the possibility of some conflict if anybody ever petitions the court to have you declared incompetent. I'll give you a great example. We had a patient in our care, and the patient's wife and mother disagreed with the course of treatment. And so before he came into our care, the doctors and the providers didn't want to listen to either one of them because there was so much arguing and conflict. Of course, they were concerned with a lawsuit. So the providers told the wife that in order for her to make decisions for him, she needed to go to court to become his court-appointed guardian. Well, that's fine. It's a huge expense because she has to hire an attorney, pay court fees. But then his mother did the same thing. And so now it's the Terry Schiavo case all over again, only it was in our community, because that's exactly what happened with Terry Schiavo. It was the husband and her parents who disagreed. If in Terry Schiavo's case, or this patient's case, they had had a pre-need guardian, that's a document in which you identify if anybody ever goes to court and wants me to be adjudicated incompetent, this is the person I want to be my guardian. And so that's the only document that gets filed with the court. So when that one is completed, that gets filed with the court, and then if there's ever a petition to determine you incompetent, the court would pull that and see the person that you would want to be your guardian. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those. You know, with the living will, we find that people tend to be hesitant to do a living will, and oftentimes because it's written in the negative. I don't want, I don't want, I don't want. Well, I think about it differently. I want to be in control of how I die, and I want to be in control of the care I get when I'm sick and when I'm dying. And a living will gives me that control. I get to maintain that. And I get to put in my document anything I want. So I can put in there that I do or don't want to be resuscitated, I do or don't want a feeding tube, I do or don't want dialysis, along with lots of other medical care and treatment. And I can also put other things in there. I can put the softer aspects of care. Things like, don't tuck the sheets in under the mattress because it pulls my feet and toes down. Leave it untucked. I can put who I want visiting me. I can put in there what kind of music I want playing. So those are the softer sides of the care that we want, but you can give thought to that and document any of those kind of wishes. I thought I had put the criteria on there. So the medical criteria is actually in the document that I gave you, but I want to go over that and explain something. A living will is just a piece of paper that you have hopefully copied and shared with family and with your healthcare providers, but it does not become effective until you have one of three medical criteria. You have to have a terminal illness or an end-stage condition, and I would say a good example would be Alzheimer's, or you have to be in a persistent vegetative state. So you have to have one of those three, and you have to lack mental capacity. If you have one medical criteria and you lack mental capacity, your living will is now effective and should be followed by both those making decisions and expressing your wishes and your healthcare providers. The healthcare surrogate, I had mentioned there was no statutory requirement other than being able to make your decisions. And that gives your health providers an idea of who they should call and talk to find out what exactly it is you'd want. The durable power of attorney, I noted that you don't have to lack capacity for this to be effective. So again, because this gives so much authority, especially related to finances, you want to make sure that it's someone you trust. The durable power of attorney also ends at death. So when you die, the person you named as your DPOA no longer has any authority to manage those finances or to do anything else for you. You'd need other provisions in place through an attorney in having set up your estate and last will and testament for that. And I talked about the DNRO. The one thing I will mention about that, I gave you a copy of it in triplicate. And I did that because Florida law requires it to be on yellow paper. A copy is as good as the original, but when you copy it, it has to be copied on yellow paper. So it's kind of very odd, but you have it in triplicate if you wanted to keep it or use it. But if you ever make copies of it, make sure it's on yellow paper. So that is kind of a summary of the advance directives and the documents that are in Florida statute. Let me talk a little bit now about advanced care planning. Again, you should always be in a position to make your own decisions, but when you can't, somebody needs to step in, and that's what advanced care planning allows you to do. My title slide was advanced care planning. It's about the conversation. That's what it's all centered around. I like to say that it's discuss, decide, then document. So that conversation, that discussion is one of the most important aspects of ACP. So that when people are called on to step in and make decisions for you, they know what it is you want. There are 3 critical elements to ACP. The first is choosing your healthcare surrogate. Making sure that that person understands what you want. And I'm going to advance here real quick. Making sure that that person understands what it is that you want and can make decisions in a crisis. The kinds of decisions that have to be made are never at 1 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, okay? They're Friday night or 2 a.m., they're a weekend, they're a holiday, when doctors are in a rush to have things happen, when the hospital needs to move you out to that next level of care because you can't stay another day. So the person needs to be able to make decisions quickly, stay calm, and agree to honor your wishes, even if they disagree. I would say, think about who is in your circle and who would do those things for you, and it's not always the person you think it will be. Great example is that my husband is not my healthcare surrogate because we had a conversation and he was very clear he would not honor my wishes. So why would I put him in that position to do that for me? So the second critical aspect of advanced care planning is think about your goals of care. If a doctor would say to your family, she or he has no hope of recovery, let's say you've had a brain bleed, going back to that young patient I mentioned earlier, you've had a brain bleed, there's no hope of recovery, you won't wake up to know who anyone is around you or to be able to communicate with anyone around you. What would you want? Think about the care you'd want to receive in that situation. And basically, it's making a decision of, do you want to be maintained on life support, or do you want to allow nature to take its natural course and you die naturally? And I'm not saying one way is better than the other because it's a personal belief. Okay, it's your decision. The third aspect is, I'm kind of going to wrap a couple things together in this, is thinking about whether you have personal, religious, or cultural beliefs that could influence what you'd want. There are some religions that have some very specific beliefs about end-of-life care. And so if that applies to you, you would want to make sure that when you complete an advanced care planning document, that is reflected in your document. And if you're unsure, then you want to make sure to talk with a faith leader to see if there is anything in particular that you need to be aware of when completing an advanced care plan. Another thing to give thought to is think about what living well means to you. And by that, I mean, what is a quality of life? I did my first living will and surrogate when I was 22 years old, and that was after working in a hospital for 6 months. And I saw so many things that I just believed were not right for me. And so over the years, I continued to revise it because things that were important to me at 22 were no longer important to me at 35 and 45 and 60. And I actually just redid mine last year because that's changed. I'm no longer interested in skiing black diamond slopes. If a doctor tells me I can never do that again, that's okay. But I love sitting in my sunroom, and I'm one of those people who likes to read the real Sunday newspaper with a cup of coffee, and that brings me joy. So think about what it is in your life that brings you joy and what you would want to be able to do to maintain that quality of life. So when you think about those three aspects of what advanced care planning is all about, your next steps are talking to family, choosing a surrogate, talking to that person, getting your wishes in writing. And then I always say it's important to talk to people other than just the surrogate. Because if you just talk to your surrogate and let's say you pick one person and you have 5 adult children, that's still not going to minimize conflict if those 5 children don't know who you picked and what you want. You want everyone in your life. I like to say, whoever you think is going to show up at your hospital bedside, they need to know your wishes and who your surrogate is, because you want them supporting that person when decisions have to be made. And then, I mentioned updating a document. Many of you in this room may have a living will. You may have a healthcare surrogate. And that's tremendous. That's wonderful. What your next step then is, if you do have something, is make sure it's still what you want it to be. Make sure that the person you've chosen is still the person you want in that position, and make sure that it documents the care you want if you're faced with a serious or sudden illness. It's easy to say that what we go by are reviewing it on the 5 Ds. If you experience a divorce, if you have a death in your family, if you have a new diagnosis or a decline in your own health, or with every new decade, those are 5 good times to make sure that you update your documents, or at least look at them to make sure that what you have is still valid. All right. So I did great. I stuck to my time. So what questions can I answer for you? Yes, sir.
My wife and I have the living will and the durable power of attorney and those paperwork that you talked about. They were made out in North Carolina. Is that a problem, us living and dying in Florida?
Everybody could hear the question? Okay. The answer is no. It's not a problem. Your documents are valid in Florida. Florida is actually, in one way, progressive with one thing that's in our statute that some states I don't think have yet. There's a provision in statute that says anyone with an advance directive that was completed in another state, that document is valid in the state of Florida, as long as it met that state statute at the time it was completed. Okay? Now, there's going to be one exception to my yes answer, but I know North Carolina, so my yes answer is still correct. If your document was from Oregon or California, and your document had a provision in it for physician-assisted death, your document is valid, but that provision is not, because it's illegal in Florida. And so it doesn't mean that your whole document gets thrown out. It just means that when your health providers are using it, working with family members, that provision would not be valid.
Thank you.
Sure.
We talked about durable power of attorney as compared to power of attorney. Can you share the difference in those?
Technically, there really isn't a power of attorney. In Florida law, it's just durable power of attorney. The law changed in 2013. And so if you complete a durable power of attorney form, I do strongly encourage you have it done by a lawyer, because the law in 2013 has very specific provisions about what has to be in it. And each provision has to have a line that you initial if you want it, or strike through if you don't. If you have a durable power of attorney, or what we used to refer to as a simple power of attorney that was done before 2013, it's valid. Anytime there's a change in law, whatever you've done prior to that is still good. It's what happens after that that has to meet the new law. So there is something that we often refer to as a simple power of attorney. That simple power of attorney is usually a one-page form, and it gives somebody the authority to do a lot of financial things like cashing checks, paying bills, accessing bank accounts. That really is not anything that is permitted anymore. If you have one of those, a bank might still take it and accept it. Very rarely did those documents include the provision for healthcare decision making. They were almost always just for finances. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I had the one-page deal, and I was told, due to that, what you said, 2013, where that bunch over in Tallahassee, who's a bunch of lawyers
Right.
that look out for each other, then now it's, the one I have now, I paid $300 to have made, and it's either 8 or 11 pages long.
That's right. They're very long because the law, like I said, the law very specifically says what has to be in it. Yes.
Do the signatures have to be notarized?
That's a yes and a no answer. The only advanced directive that has to be notarized is a durable power of attorney. And that's another reason I think it should be done by a lawyer's office, and they make sure it gets notarized. A living will, a healthcare surrogate, what else? The pre-need guardian, those do not require notary. They require 2 witnesses. And the witnesses cannot be anyone you name as a surrogate, and 1 witness cannot be a spouse or blood relative. Dan.
Jamie, could you maybe walk us through the Honoring Choices document?
Sure.
Kind of point out some of the highlights.
I'll give you just a real quick history too about how Honoring Choices came to be, and which also includes how the document came to be. Probably about 6 years ago, Community Hospice identified a quality problem, and that was patients were being admitted to community hospice from hospitals, and when they would get into our care, no one knew what they wanted, because at that point they already lacked capacity and their family members had never had a conversation, and so no one really knew what the patient wanted. So the family members were reluctant to have the patient not receive resuscitation, and so when the patient would have a cardiac or pulmonary arrest, they were being resuscitated and shipped back to the hospital ER. That's poor care. That's just bad care. So our administrators went to the administrators of all of the local hospitals and said that, you know, we have this dilemma. We don't think that we're providing good care. We need some help. Well, the hospital CEOs in that meeting said, we have the same problem. We have ICUs full of patients receiving aggressive care, and it's just prolonging their death. It's not going to help them get better. So the hospitals and community hospice agreed to develop one consistent advanced care planning program in the community. Our organization agreed to take the reins and lead the effort. And so with support of all of the hospitals and someone from each of the hospitals working together with us on a committee, I'm used to it. We get it all the time at my office. We decided that we would look to see what was out in the world, what was best practice already. We found a program out of Wisconsin called Respecting Choices, and we did a lot of research. Respecting Choices had been in place for 20 years. I'm going to tell you something that's really amazing, and it still amazes me. When our committee started this work, each member of the hospital, at that time I was actually working for one of those hospitals, not for this program, we did a chart review of patients who died in all of the local hospitals from October through December of 2013. And all 100% of the patients who died, we looked at their charts, and all we looked for was the presence of any kind of an advance directive, whether it was formal or whether it was a written piece of paper that the patient had handed in when they got checked in. Less than 14% of those patient records had any kind of an advance directive on the chart. This program in Wisconsin, after 20 years, now it's a culture change and they've done an amazing job. 96% of the patients who die in that region of Wisconsin have an advanced care plan. 99% of the time it's on the chart, and they did a chart review too, and their chart review was looking at what the patient had wanted in their document and compared it against the care they got. 99% of the time the patient got the care they wanted. So that's community change, and that's what we want in our community. So we adopted their model, and we had them come down, and that model is around facilitating a conversation, not just filling out a piece of paper, but having people who are trained to guide the conversation. And we have 430 people, as of last month, in our community trained to help guide this conversation. Many of them are in hospital settings. Many of them are in primary care offices, because that's the ideal place to have this discussion with a doctor. But one thing our committee did was create a document. And when we wrote this document, we took the documents that everybody already was using in the hospitals. We took documents from all over the country that other places were using. And then we had some focus groups, primarily of physicians and health providers, to say, what is it you want to see in a document? And in talking to doctors, they want to know, does my patient want a feeding tube? Do they want to be on a ventilator? Do they want to be resuscitated? If they have one of these 3 medical criteria. And so we worked on writing a document, and that's what this is. The first page just identifies who you are. The next page talks about healthcare surrogate and their duties and allows you to identify who your primary surrogate is. And then you have the opportunity to identify a secondary and a third person in case your first and second are not available. And the next page is a table of typical care and treatment options that people face when they have a sudden or serious illness and they're in a hospital. And so using that table, you get to then choose, do I want this or do I not want this? Remembering that what you're choosing is only valid if you have one of those 3 medical criteria that's at the top of that page. So I think is that page 4? 3? So on page 3, the 3 medical criteria I talked about are at the top. And then that table is below it where you have the opportunity to decide whether you want something or not. We are making a minor revision and we're pulling organ donation out of that table and putting it as a standalone because so many people have some strong beliefs about organ donation. And then page 4 is a page of all lines where you can write things in, anything that you would want or not want. You know, I said something about bed sheets and music and who you want visiting. I've had people write all kinds of things in there about what they'd want or not want. We put that in there because when we first started the program, Community Hospice had supported the 5 Wishes document. I don't know if anyone had heard of that. Okay, so the 5 Wishes document is a very soft advanced care planning document where you identify things like who you want at your bedside, what kind of music you want playing, you know, all kinds of other things. Well, when we did the focus group with the doctors said they hated the 5 Wishes. They said, we don't care what kind of music they want. We want to know these medical things. The registration clerks at the hospitals also did not like 5 Wishes. Why? Because it was duplicated. It was on front to back paper, and when people would copy it, they would run it through a Xerox machine, and you'd have copies of only pages 1, 3, and 5, and they'd show up at the hospital with that. Well, that's an invalid document, so they essentially had nothing. So we left that full page in there for comments because so many people were using the 5 Wishes document and they wanted space to write, but we produced it on single-sided pages so that it can be, with a perforated edge, it can be separated from the cover, run through the copier, and you don't have that other problem that we experienced. And then the last page is the signature page where you sign it and you have 2 witnesses sign. Again, your witnesses do have to be 18 or older, cannot be your surrogates, and 1 cannot be a spouse or blood relative. So our committee has done a lot of work. If you do get on the computer and look at websites, you can go to the Honoring Choices Florida website, and the resources tab has a lot of information on it. All of those care and treatment options in that table, we have written what we call a fact sheet. And so there's a fact sheet on everything. So if you want to know how successful CPR is, pull up the fact sheet and it'll talk to you about how successful CPR is, whether it's done in a hospital or out on the community grounds and you're found down. So big difference, and it's good to have that knowledge and those facts when making decisions.
Jamie, this document is valid even if you're not a hospice patient.
Oh, absolutely. It's a community-wide document. So I tell this tongue-in-cheek, and I'm thinking about the gentleman who commented about the lawyers in our legislature, because one of the hardest things to do is to get attorneys to agree on a document. When we wrote the document, we took it through the legal departments of all of the local hospitals, and that included Mayo sending it to Rochester and UF sending it to Gainesville, and the legal departments of all the hospitals approved it. So that was one of our biggest accomplishments, was getting approval on the document. And we took it other places too. St. Vincent's is part of Ascension Healthcare, and so the ethics department in St. Louis approved it. The Florida Catholic Conference of Bishops approved it, and so it got the stamp of approval from the legal community as well as the Catholic community, which was very important for us because of the feeding tube issue.
I believe here at Westminster Woods, we have several people who are certified in
You do.
helping people. Maybe somebody
Anybody
can
here?
remind me who they are. I think Robin Whitelester is one.
Robin is. Mm-hmm.
That's all I know.
I think one of the nurses in the healthcare center, I think that's the other person.
Okay.
And there may be one more.
They have come through the facilitator training, and the facilitator training is it's actually a pretty amazing training to go through. You do some computer work before coming to an all-day class, and so that was what they had to do to get their certification. And communities approach advanced care planning in a lot of different ways. Much of what I do now is in the community doing talks like this about advanced care planning, but I also help various sites in communities help establish processes within the community on how they can get connected to a facilitator and have some help in guiding that conversation and completing a document. Mm-hmm.
If you have any other comments or questions, this is the time.
Tell you something on the lighter side.
Okay.
I'm about having to pay $300 for that. When I started making it for my wife, she already had dementia. So I made it for her. And then I went ahead and had one made for my son. The attorney told me if I'd had one, he was gonna pay me $500, but he'd give me a break since I had him make two, and he'd only charge $300.
You probably just had to print it twice. Well, the phone number and website are on the document. If you think of questions later and you'd like an answer to something, you can reach me through that phone number or the website. So feel free to reach out to me anytime and let me know if you have questions.
Jamie, thank you. This is really important, and just to show you how important some of us feel it is, a number of people in here bypassed going to line dancing in order to come into this session. I know.
That's as good as big.
Just a reminder, we're actually having two talks this month, and Wednesday the 17th, we're going to have someone in here talking about concerns and questions you may have about insurance issues. So I promise you, I've beaten on him and told him he is not here to sell insurance, but he is here to talk about the concerns and the questions people may have that have to do with insurance. So that's Wednesday the 17th. With that said, Jamie will probably hang around for a little bit if you want to talk to her. Thank you very much for coming. We're adjourned.